If you're an empath who's been betrayed, you probably remember the moment everything changed. Not the betrayal itself necessarily, but the moment after. When you realized the person you trusted, the one you read so carefully, the one you gave so much grace to, was someone you never actually knew. And if that's where you are right now, I need you to hear something before we go any further. The shattering you feel isn't weakness, it's information. And in the next few minutes, I'm going to walk you through what most empaths discover after their first real betrayal. Not to make it hurt more, but to help you understand why it hurt differently for you than it might for someone else. Here are 2 promises, so you stay with me. First, one of these discoveries will explain why you keep replaying the betrayal, even though you want to move on. Second, near the end, I'll give you one question that will help you know if you're healing or if you're just hiding. But before we get to what you discovered, let's start with what actually broke. Because for most people, betrayal breaks trust. But for an empath, betrayal breaks something deeper. It breaks your faith in your own perception. You didn't just lose a person. You lost confidence in your ability to see people clearly. And that's the wound that doesn't show up in conversations. That's the one that makes you question every new connection, every gut feeling, every moment of openness. Because if you couldn't see this coming, what else are you missing? Here's the first thing most empaths discover after betrayal. You start thinking, I gave too much, I cared too much, I saw too much good in them. And you tell yourself the solution is to care less, to protect more, to become harder. But here's what you actually learn if you sit with it long enough. Your empathy wasn't the problem. Your empathy was beautiful. The problem was that you gave it to someone who mistook your depth for availability, who confused your understanding with permission, who saw your sensitivity and thought, this person won't fight back. Let me give you a small scene. Before the betrayal, someone crosses a line. Maybe they make a comment that stings. Maybe they dismiss something important to you. And you notice it. Your body notices it. But then you do something very particular. You explain it away. You tell yourself they're stressed. They didn't mean it that way. I'm probably overthinking. And you're not making excuses because you're naive. You're making excuses because your system learned early that maintaining connection sometimes meant absorbing harm. So here's a tiny check-in. Don't think, just notice. When you replay the betrayal, do you feel anger at them or shame at yourself? If it's mostly shame, that's important, because shame says, I should have known better. But the truth might be simpler. They hid well. And you trusted openly. Those aren't the same moral weight. The second discovery hits differently. You realize the relationship wasn't balanced. It was a performance you were directing without knowing it. You were reading their moods, adjusting your tone, managing their reactions, making yourself smaller so they could feel bigger. And the betrayal didn't just hurt because they broke your trust. It hurt because you'd been working so hard to keep them comfortable, and they weren't doing any of that work for you. Here's what this looks like in real time. You'd walk into a conversation already scanning. Are they in a good mood? Are they defensive today? Should I bring this up now or wait? And you didn't do this because you were controlling. You did it because your nervous system learned that other people's emotional states were your responsibility to navigate. So when they betrayed you, it wasn't just the act. It was the retroactive realization that you'd been alone the whole time, carrying a connection they were only visiting. This one is subtle, but it changes everything. After betrayal, many empaths discover they mistook emotional intensity for emotional safety. The person who betrayed you probably wasn't distant. They might have been the opposite. Deep, late-night talks, raw confessions, moments that felt profound. And you thought, finally, someone who goes as deep as I do. But intensity isn't intimacy. Intensity is what happens when someone opens fast. Intimacy is what happens when someone stays consistent. Let me be careful here. This isn't about blaming yourself for being fooled. Many people use intensity strategically because they know empaths respond to depth, They know you're drawn to authenticity, so they perform it early and well. But real connection doesn't announce itself with fireworks. Real connection builds slowly, through small moments of reliability, through someone showing up when it's boring, when it's inconvenient, when there's nothing dramatic to process. Here's the discovery that usually makes empaths angry. Not just hurt, angry. You realize that your capacity to forgive, to understand, to see someone's pain behind their behavior, that gift you thought was love, was being used as permission to hurt you repeatedly. Because every time they crossed a line, you found a reason. Every time they disappointed you, you gave grace, and they learned something dangerous. This person will always let me back in. And here's what makes it worse. You didn't forgive because you were weak. You forgave because you could see their humanity. You could see their wounds. You could see the version of them they could become. But they weren't interested in becoming that version. They were interested in staying comfortable, and your forgiveness made that possible. The final discovery is the one that takes the longest. You have to grieve not just who they were, but who you needed them to be. Because empaths don't just see people. They see potential. They see the person underneath the defense. They see the goodness buried under the behavior. And when someone betrays you, you're not just losing the real person. You're losing the version you believed in, the one you invested in, the one you were patiently waiting to emerge. And this is why betrayal hits empaths so deeply. You don't just lose someone, you lose a story. You lose the future you were building in your mind. You lose the belief that your love could help them heal. And you have to sit with the hardest truth of all. Some people don't want to be seen that deeply. Some people find your belief in them uncomfortable because it asks them to grow, and they've chosen not to. Here's the practical path I promised. Simple, not dramatic. First, stop punishing your empathy. The betrayal happened because someone made a choice, not because you cared too much. Second, learn the difference between someone who's struggling and someone who's choosing harm. Struggling people take responsibility eventually. Harmful people make you responsible for their behavior. And here's the question that tells you if you're healing or hiding. After this betrayal, are you closing your heart or are you choosing more carefully? Because closing means everyone pays for one person's actions. Choosing carefully means you're learning discernment without losing softness. A safe person doesn't punish you for being an empath. They don't exploit your understanding. They don't mistake your depth for weakness. They meet your care with care. Not perfectly, not always, but consistently. If you've been betrayed, you didn't need to be less empathetic. You needed someone worthy of your empathy. And that person exists. But first, you have to stop betraying yourself by giving your gift to people who aren't ready to honor it. Because the real discovery after betrayal isn't that people can't be trusted. It's that your empathy is precious, and precious things deserve protection.